everybody, welcome to the Briefing Room. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. Great to have you with us on this Wednesday. A number of breaking headlines that we are following at this hour, starting with the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve Chief, Jerome Powell, a few moments ago announced that they are now cutting interest rates for the second time this year, citing threats to the U.S. economy. The move will reduce the benchmark rate by a quarter point. It'll also make it cheaper now for consumers and businesses to borrow money. While the economy generally has looked pretty good, the Fed says it's worried about that protracted trade war with China and a slowdown in American manufacturing. Well, 3 days after that daring strike on the world's oil supply inside Saudi Arabia, that government today publicly blamed Iran for the first time. The Saudi military officials showed publicly today video that they said documents the trail of drones from Iranian airspace into Saudi Arabia. They also showed parts of drones that they recovered from the site of the attack. President Trump, who just yesterday walked back his threat of possible military action against Iran, today said he'd, quote, substantially increase sanctions on that country. Take a listen.
Well, there are many options, as you know, Phil. There are many options, and there's the ultimate option, and there are options a lot less than that. And we'll see. We're in a very powerful position. Right now, we're in a very, very powerful position.
President Trump out in California making that news, also standing alongside his new pick for national security advisor. The man on the right there is former Republican lawyer and hostage negotiator in the Trump administration, Robert O'Brien. He most recently helped negotiate the release of rapper A$AP Rocky over in Sweden. He replaces John Bolton, who you remember was fired last week, and becomes now President Trump's fourth national security advisor, more than any president has had at this point in their presidency. Well, the president's trip to California has also set off a fresh showdown with that state over Trump administration moves to roll back regulations on the environment. The president announced this morning on Twitter that he's now revoking a waiver for California that gave that state the ability to regulate air pollution from cars and trucks, which is done almost exclusively since the 1970s. You see the tweet there. For more on why the president is taking this step, what he hopes to do by it, our senior reporter Ann Flaherty, who covers the EPA and other agencies, is here. And let's just start for people trying to digest what the president has done when it comes to car and truck standards. What did California actually want, and why did it bother President Trump?
Well, what California wanted were stricter standards, that if you were going to sell a car or a truck in their state, that it would meet a fuel efficiency standard that was higher than the federal level. And they even took it a step further this summer when they made a deal with 4 auto manufacturers to say you have to meet these standards if you want to sell in our state. And some other states have agreed they want to take those same standards. So in the administration's mind, it created 2 standards, 2 markets.
Also, a lot of automakers going along with it, improving fuel efficiency for consumers. The Obama administration had set a pretty high target, 50 miles per gallon by all vehicles by 2025, and California going further than that. Let's bring into the conversation Mary Nichols. She's chair of the California Air Resources Board. She was appointed by Republican Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, also helped set these standards. Mary, thanks for joining us. You say you're going to fight this move by the administration.
Yes, actually, California has been enforcing our own vehicle emission and air pollution standards going back to the 1960s. So it's something that every governor of California, Republican and Democrat, going back to Ronald Reagan, has insisted on, which is because our air is so bad, we have had such a challenge to remove the smog from our air, and we have millions of people who are affected by it, that we should have the ability to require cleaner cars. And I want to make it clear that we don't regulate the fuel economy. That's done by the Department of Transportation under the CAFE standards. So part of the confusion, I think, in some of the news coverage of this has been that people are talking about miles per gallon. And while there's a relationship between what comes out of the tailpipe and the fuel economy, how much gas is actually being burned, our regulations only focus on the pollutants themselves, including greenhouse gases. So we have been enforcing these rules for years. Back in the Obama era, we reached an agreement with the auto industry and the federal government where we all aligned our standards and we're moving forward together together. This is now an effort on the part of the Trump administration to roll back to where we were before Obama.
And these standards, Mary, have been widely popular, not just in your state, but across the country. Let's show our viewers a recent poll from the Washington Post and the Kaiser Family Foundation, which found that more than 60% of people actually support emissions standards and oppose President Trump's plan to freeze these standards that were put in place, as you were just saying, with the Obama administration. And Ann Flaherty, I guess a lot of people wondering today, why is the president picking a fight with California? Who cares? Why does he care if California wants to set a tougher standard?
Yeah, you know, I think California is one of these states that Trump loves to try to fight, and he loves to, you know, go after. He talks about it a lot, all the liberals in California. So I do think there's some politics to it. I think there's also a little bit of frustration that the Californians, the state officials there, are trying to supersede his authority. So this is sort of an interesting, I think, power play that we're going to see play out in the courts.
It's also an interesting dynamic for conservatives, Mary, because traditionally they tend to be very states' rights, let the states regulate their own economies and environments, very deferential to the states, but here they seem to be grabbing that back. But what do you say to the president's argument, reiterated today by some of his officials, that a single national standard for fuel efficiency and emissions is helpful to business, that there shouldn't be a patchwork of state standards? There should be one national standard.
Well, the whole argument about the Clean Air Act for decades has been what should be done by the federal government and what should be left to the states. So under our National Clean Air Act, states have the primary role and responsibility of cleaning up the air for their citizens. The one area where there has been a federal preemption of authority, where the feds have taken over the authority, has been with the auto industry, with one big exception, which is California, and states that choose to move ahead further and faster have always been allowed to do that, as long as we could establish that there was technical feasibility for what we were doing and that there was a need to do it. Well, there's no issue about the need. We need to have cleaner cars for both public health and to address the threat of climate change. And the technical feasibility is there. Nobody's really contesting that either. It's also the case that we have states that have joined our coalition and have adopted California standards that are states with Republican governors or Republican legislatures, as well as Democrat. So I think this really is not an issue that's new in a lot of ways. What's new is that for once we have a president who's trying to not just block anybody from going forward, but actually is trying to pull back an existing program that's already on the books. We agree that a national program that we all buy into is more cost effective. That was why we signed on in the first place to the Obama standards, is because we could have one national standard. But now that the president wants to revoke that standard, we have to go back to our old program, which is much more aggressive. It's much more protective than what the feds have on the books.
And we know that you'll be fighting this in court. This is by no means the final word. Mary Nichols, chair of the California Air Resources Board, thank you so much. For more on what this change, potential change, could mean for consumers, and there is a potential big impact, I want to bring in Shannon Baker Brandstetter from Consumer Reports, which has been actually crunching some numbers on what this could mean for how much you pay for gasoline in this country and about how much your car actually pollutes. Shannon, tell us what you've been finding out with your analysis.
Sure. So right now there is one national standard. Both the states and the federal governments are at the same level. But what the Trump administration is trying to do is to weaken those standards out to 2025. And so the impact of that is that consumers will be paying more in gasoline. And when we crunched the numbers, we found that that rollback by the Trump administration will cost an extra $460 billion for consumers. And that works out to about $3,300 per vehicle over the life of the average vehicle. So we find that there really are dollar and cent impacts on consumer pocketbooks from this kind of a rollback.
That's not insignificant over the life of a vehicle based on these standards. Shannon, thanks for bringing us that analysis from Consumer Reports. And all of this just seems so confusing. But what's your bottom line? How do we understand this?
You know, I think that the way that Trump is going to play this is to say, you know, if we roll back regulations, cars become cheaper. When cars become cheaper, people buy more. That creates jobs, and they'll also trade in their old cars and have safer vehicles on the road. As we've heard from Consumer Reports, I think there's a cost of fuel that's going to hit consumers. So nothing is for free. And I think the bottom line is that consumers can buy what they want, and we'll see where the market goes. But for right now, this is a political fight not unlike straws and light bulbs.
Straws and light bulbs. Now car fuel efficiency standards going to land in court. Ann Flaherty, thank you so much. The president is using his visit out west to also shine a spotlight on California's problem with homelessness. While that state has just 12% of the country's population, it also has half of the nation's unsheltered homeless population that lives in California. On Twitter, the president is now amplifying concerns and complaints that have for a long time been those shared by the state's Democratic politicians, that encampments in major cities of LA and San Francisco have been untenable. They're bad for business. Of course, they don't agree on solutions. Democrats have accused the president here of making the problem worse. And our Matt Gutman, a chief national correspondent out in Los Angeles, there's actually been spending some time taking a look at the homelessness problem in California. Hey, Matt, good to see you. So what have you seen firsthand? Give our viewers a sense of the scope, and we'll take a look at some of the pictures you got.
Even before we start, there's a reason that there is such a significant proportion of homeless people here in California. Look around you. It's nice. It's pleasant most of the year. It is a very comfortable place to be if you are living on the street. And people tend to choose places where they can also get help. And that is this Skid Row area in downtown Los Angeles. And we've embedded, Devin, with fire station number 9, which is the busiest fire station in the whole country. And that's not because they have that many fires, although they do. It's because they essentially serve as the primary healthcare providers for this massive population of thousands of homeless people on Skid Row. And if you drive down there and you see it and you spend time with these folks, you learn that they're basically giving them, you know, stitches when they cut themselves. If people call in and their friend has just collapsed from an overdose, these firefighters are there first on the scene. They take them to the hospital. If someone has a headache, a bellyache, anything, cardiac arrest, this is where they go. They obviously also have shootings and stabbings, etc. But what you see is there's this whole ecosystem of a society that's developed on the streets of downtown Los Angeles, and there's no real solution, because what we saw with our own eyes is people collapsing with overdoses one day, and then the very next day, the same team that we embedded with were picking that same person off the ground, and they recognized the person that they had saved, literally saved their lives the day before, as the person who had just OD'd, and then they're doing it all over again. And there's no easy solution, and that's what we've learned from embedding with these firefighters. They don't have a solution. What they are trying to do is streamline the way this works, right? Because this has been an enormous drain on the system. It is insane to have firefighters bring out a giant fire truck and an engine every time somebody complains of having a headache, because they are responding to a 911 call. So what they're trying to do is have these quick reaction teams. They're trying to have sobriety teams that take people to halfway houses or other programs that can help them with their sobriety. And they're trying all sorts of different things. But so far, nothing has really worked to mitigate the number of homeless people on the ground in Los Angeles. In fact, the numbers are only growing, Devin, and not the city's mayor, not the firefighters. Nobody seems to have a ready solution for this. I don't think President Trump will either.
Yeah, it's a really intractable problem, Matt. Great reporting. Thank you so much. The president suggested maybe policing, maybe busing these people to a shelter. Not a lot of details there, but this is a tough one. No, you're going to stay on it. This is just the start of a big project you're working on. Much more from you, Matt Gutman, in the coming days. Thank you so much, Matt, for sharing that. Back here in Washington, as this city remains in a holding pattern on new gun violence prevention measures, the parents of those victims of the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting back in 2012 are out with a provocative new public service announcement highlighting just how unacceptable and surreal the situation has become with the threat of mass shootings at America's schools. Take a look at this video, although I will caution you that some of these scenes could be quite hard to watch. Take a look.
This year, my mom got me the perfect bag for back to school. These colorful binders help me stay organized.
These headphones are just what I need for studying.
These new sneakers are just what I need for the new year.
This jacket is a real must-have.
My parents got me the skateboard I wanted. It's pretty cool.
These scissors really come in handy in art class. These colored pencils, too.
These new socks, they can be a real lifesaver.
I finally got my own phone to stay in touch with my mom.
That PSA gives me goosebumps. It's the product of Nicole Hockley and her organization, Sandy Hook Promise. She joins me now. Nicole, thanks so much. You're the mother of 6-year-old Dylan Hockley, who, of course, was killed at Sandy Hook back in 2012. Thanks for being here. Tell us about the PSA, what message you hope to send, and why you're releasing it now.
We're releasing this PSA in the back-to-school time because I think a lot of parents don't really understand what that school experience is like for their kids today. School shootings continue to increase. Last year was the worst year on record, and the sad thing is these acts are preventable. So by showing an ad like this now and really kind of giving parents a little bit of an emotional gut punch, we're hoping to engage them in prevention as a solution and talk to their kids about how they know the signs and can learn the signs within their school to prevent violence before it happens, so that this stops being the normal experience that our kids are having today.
Yeah, it's shocking that it's normal as an experience, and to see it is really quite something. I'm joined on the phone by Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, who, of course, is from the state where the Sandy Hook massacre happened, has been a leading advocate on this issue. Senator, thank you for calling in. I want to get your reaction to this very powerful PSA, if you've seen it, and whether you think, as Nicole Hockley was just talking about there, your colleagues have sort of a real firsthand sense that this is what it's like right now at America's schools.
I'm grateful to Nicole and her team for putting this out there. I hope that every single one of my colleagues looks at this. And of course, all of us as parents have to listen to our kids come home, having gone through these active shooter drills, which are a minor but not insignificant trauma in and of themselves. I think that we're at a moment in this country where parents and students are demanding action. And you're seeing the needle move more than it ever has before in Congress, with Republicans more and more willing to look at things like universal background checks or bans on these dangerous military-style weapons. And I wish it didn't have to take these kind of messages. I wish people didn't have to be face-to-face with the reality of what a school shooting looks like in order to change their mind, but I do think minds are changing.
And Senator, on that very point, I want to ask you, just said that you feel the needle is moving now more than ever. Bring us inside those conversations you're having right now with your colleagues and with the White House. How optimistic are you? Give us an update that something can be done.
Well, I mean, we're at an odd moment right now where the White House has, put a proposal on the table that was leaked to the press this morning that, is constructive in that it shows they are still trying to come up with creative ideas. And I'll be sitting down with the Attorney General along with Senator Manchin and Senator Toomey tonight to try to understand more about what the White House is willing to do. The problem is that the president still hasn't weighed in, even on the proposal that his own Attorney General is floating around Congress, and it's kind of hard for Republicans to say yes to anything unless they know where the president stands. But, the fact that we are talking at this level of detail once again is a sign that the courageous work that Nicole and so many other parents and survivors are doing is having an impact.
And finally, I just want to ask you about the president's tweet this morning. Everybody's waiting to hear where he stands and all this stuff. You talked about some comments that former Congressman Beto O'Rourke made at our debate in Houston last week. The president says those comments about taking people's assault weapons makes it harder to get a deal. Do you think that language is counterproductive? What did you make of that moment?
I hope the president isn't grasping for excuses as to why he is ultimately going to choose to do nothing again. If we we ultimately do nothing, if the Congress does not pass any substantial reform of our gun laws, there's only one party to blame. It's the Republicans that have been standing in the way of this for a very long time. So I hope that we can continue the discussions that we've been having. I'm looking forward to meeting with the Attorney General later today, and hopefully we'll have more to report in the coming days.
We look forward to an update. Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, thank you so much, sir, for taking the time to call in. Appreciate it very much. Nicole, I want to bring you back into the conversation. You just heard the senator say he feels like the needle is moving. How do you feel about the state of affairs right now? You have personally lobbied so many members of Congress for years. I imagine it must be quite frustrating and disheartening that nothing's actually been done.
It is disheartening, and I applaud Senator Murphy for being so committed to this effort for 7 years now. But I do agree with him that the needle's moving, not only in Congress, because this is an open conversation that is happening much more regularly now, and people are even campaigning on it now. So that is a significant change. But also in general, the conversation across America has changed. More people are involved than ever before. We're also seeing more people saying something and averting potential threats of school shootings and suicide. So there's a lot of action being taken. We're getting there. It is frustrating. It is a long journey, but I have absolute faith that we will create a safer community for our kids and for our future.
And finally, just because it does seem, at least politically speaking, the ball is in the president's court at this latest moment as they talk about doing something in the wake of those double shootings last month in Texas and Ohio. What would you say if you sat down with President Trump and met him face to face? What would your message be to President Trump at this moment?
I would urge President Trump to take action. The ball is in his court. There is legislation that's available today that would help save lives, and it's not about taking away rights. It's about doing the right thing for his country. So I would urge him to take that action immediately.
Nicole Hockley, co-founder of Sandy Hook Promise. We so appreciate you and joining us here, Nicole. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, next today, September is Suicide Prevention Month in this country, and today we're highlighting the impact that suicide has on America's most vulnerable citizens. It's veterans. Suicide rates among veterans are 1.5 times higher than the civilian population. 6,000 veterans die by suicide every single year. The highest rate is among 18 to 34-year-olds. Earlier today, I spoke with the director of the Suicide Prevention Program at the Department of Veterans Affairs, Dr. Matt Miller, to ask him why so many of those deaths involve a firearm and what the agency is doing now.
About 69–70% of veteran suicides are firearm related. What we really focus on is safety regarding firearms and working with veterans to understand when they may be at increased risk for suicide, and then with that recognition, introducing time and space between weapon and ammunition and self for a period of time. And veterans are overall very receptive to this. For example, gun lock distribution, that's one of our most popular handouts at events that we engage for suicide prevention.
Thanks to Dr. Matt Miller at the VA. If you know someone who is contemplating suicide or you're looking for a way to help, you can contact the Suicide Prevention Hotline, 1-800-273-8255. There are people there 24/7, willing to listen, willing to walk you through it, and if you're considering it yourself, to get you some help. Our thanks to that team. Finally today, on a lighter note, a national treasure here in Washington reopens to the public tomorrow after years of technical glitches and construction delays. It's the Washington Monument. There it is on this beautiful sunny day in Washington. It has been shut down for quite some time after the earthquake here. That elevator inside the monument rocked with mechanical trouble, but today our Serena Marshall out there on the National Mall got a first-hand look. She got to ride up in that elevator. Serena, what did you get to experience today?
Yeah, Devin, that elevator that's inside today is much different than the first elevator that was put in 1888. That one was actually steam, and at the time, women and children weren't allowed to go up in it because it was considered too dangerous. But this snazzy new elevator, all of the high-tech upgrades the Washington Monument has gone through over the past couple years, means finally tomorrow, after 3 years, as you said, but before that, an additional 3 years that has been under construction, will reopen to the public. That fence going away, those visitors will be flocking to this monument.
Now we get to go see
one of the most coveted views in all of D.C. It's a view unlike any other in D.C., from the U.S. Capitol to the Lincoln Memorial, and all of the nation capital's most historic buildings in between. And it can only be seen here at the Washington Monument.
This is one of the premier icons of our nation.
Standing 555 feet, 5 1/8 inches, it's the cornerstone of the National Mall. But since 2016, following an elevator cable snapping, it closed its doors to the public again after it had only been open for 2 years from a previous 3-year shutdown from the 2011 earthquake. It just opened after 3 years. It's been closed a lot longer than people expected. Why did it take so long?
Well, when you get into doing a renovation, once you start getting into it, you determine that there's some other things that you need to take care of, and sometimes it requires that you have to do things in certain orders.
The upgrades mean a high-tech security system outside, a smoother elevator ride inside, but at the top, those same breathtaking views. So when you get to the top and you get to see that view, what would that moment feel like?
Probably amazing. Haven't been to the top yet, but looking forward to it. It's our country.
For tourists, it means signs like this will disappear starting tomorrow. Now, to come and visit the Washington Monument, it's free, open to the public, but to go inside, you do need a ticket. They're going to be giving those tickets away beginning tomorrow at 8:30 every day on a first-come, first-served basis. In about a month, you'll be able to get those tickets online, pre-planning, in advance, book your ticket, book your elevator ride to the top to get those stunning views. And they're, again, Devin, always free to the public. They're hoping to ramp up those numbers in the coming weeks to get to the 150 visitors per half hour that they were seeing before the monument shut down for repairs. Devin?
Hope those cables hold up this time, Serena. Sign me up. I've never actually been up there. It looks like a pretty cool view. Before I let you go, though, I was struck. I was reading some trivia about this. Sounds like that first elevator you were mentioning was actually off limits to women because it was considered too dangerous.
Devin, I think I've become a Washington Monument mini historian here. There's so many cool facts about this building. Not only was that first elevator off limits to women and children, it was put in a year after it opened. They closed it back down to put that elevator in, to then close it back down again 10 years later to replace it with the electric elevator. But another cool factoid for you here, Devin, the cornerstone of the Washington Monument actually inside has a copy of the Declaration of Independence, a copy of the Constitution, and newspapers from 14 states. So that's buried somewhere on the property here.
All right, Serena Marshall for us on the National Mall. Thanks so much, Serena. Thank you for watching us here today on the Briefing Room. We're here every day, 3:30 Eastern Time on ABC News Live. Hope to see you back here tomorrow. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. Have a great afternoon.